3. Okay, there's a few more. How many of you would like to see code today? Ay, ay, ay. Big disappointment then. Because although this is a level 400 session, we are trying to not show any code. We are trying to explain what are the concepts that are behind the API. So I just want to set the expectation. The code, namely, is quite, if you really dive into the code, it is quite elaborate to actually understand really what we are writing down. There's a lot of quick starts in the SDK, but I want to set expectations just up front, right? So we are really going to show you what is actually the design concept behind the API. And it's still a level 400 session, but that is what our objective is here. So we also are going to try to show it as much as possible through demos. Demos that we usually, from a marketing perspective, are always doing in a nice story. But this time we are not going to talk about the nice story in the demo. We are going to talk what is actually going on under the hood inside the API. So that to set the expectations, let's actually then get going with the slides. We have a few slides with regards to what is new in the Unified Communications Managed API and what you can do with it. And then we are essentially going into that demo, and we are going to explain what are the concepts behind there. What you need to understand is that the Unified Communications Managed API is used by a lot of Microsoft products. And as a consequence of that, actually, it is a few things that are very important to realize that came out of that. So given the fact that it's used by Exchange, and in Exchange Unified Messaging is actually built on this API, it actually became a free API. So because we are not allowed to push low-volume products, like Lync at this point in time, still considered a low-volume product, going to transition next year, we are not allowed to charge for it. So it is a free SIP stack that you're getting. And in that same unified messaging, you also have speech technology. So it's also free speech technology that you get. The other thing which is important to understand is that it's a .NET API. So although it's called a SIP stack, and although it's about speech recognition, you actually do not need to really know about SIP. You do not need to know about speech recognition because effectively it are very high-level classes. It's a .NET API that has abstracted all that complexity away. And because it was used by Exchange Unified Messaging, although this session is advertised as a session that actually is linked to the Lync server, the same API can also be used for voice-only scenarios against other voice-over-IP gateways. I will come back in a second to what are the use cases, but if you would like to build an IVR, an interactive voice response, and you would not like to deploy Lync server, the Unified Communications Managed API, that SIP stack and that speech recognition that we have, actually provide you with an opportunity to hook it up directly to that voice-over-IP gateway. And if you would like to have more details about that, you can go to the Exchange web pages where they actually explain step by step how to hook up Exchange Unified Messaging. Now you know that it's the same as the Unified Communications Managed API. How to hook that up to those voice-over-IP gateways. What is also important to understand is that it is a layered API. So I spoke about under the hood that we have those SIP stacks and the speech recognition, and there is also a mixer, an MCU as we call that, where we mix the audio, transcode the audio, those type of things. But there is also a layer on top. And for example, for IVR, you need something like Voice XML, but you can also use Windows Workflow. However, the bulk of the work needs to be done in the core API, what we call the core UCMA core API. That is the API. If you are building an application, of course, it is very easy to get started with Windows Workflow, but try to stick to that core API. I really would like to urge you to do that because Workflow, nice to use, but it is very, very much more advisable to use that core API because the core API gives you the raw potential of every functionality that we have. Now, if you are talking about what is inside there, right, we have on a very high level, there are two parts in the Unified Communications Managed API. On the one hand side, you've got communications, and on the other hand side, you've got collaboration. Now, inside the communications, you can do things that are very logical for something like Lync server, which is also built for certain server roles on that Unified Communications Managed API. First of all, if you are talking about telephony, we're talking about call management. If we're talking about a real-time communication server, we are talking about instant messaging. And of course, we are dealing with everything that has to do around audio and video. So in a moment, we are going to demonstrate, for example, a music on hold player. And that music on hold player is also built on the Unified Communications Managed API. Now, there's also a whole set of functionality in Lync Server that is associated with conferencing. So what we are allowing in the Unified Communications Managed API are effectively two things. On the one hand side, there's the whole management of conferences. So, for example, I'm involved in many projects currently where people are swapping out their IBM investments for Unified Communications investments from Microsoft. But that means that, for example, you have a transition period in which you have to have Lotus Notes do scheduling of online meetings, because they don't have swapped it out notes for Exchange yet, so you need to integrate it. The API that you would be using to actually provide yourself with that scheduling capabilities is the Unified Communications Managed API. So we actually are shipping, on the basis of this API, a whole web scheduler, a standalone one as well, but also one that is particularly for Lotus Notes. And then you actually can organize those online meetings or conference meetings, etc. Now, the other thing which you will see if you are going to the other sessions is that we also work with a lot of other vendors, especially when it comes down to audio and video. Especially video is the one that we demonstrate all the time. So, for example, in our overview session that I participated in on last Monday, we showed how Polycom does it. How Polycom shows you the Brady Bunch, all those little screens. And those are actually hooks into our Unified Communications Managed API, where they are leveraging the UCMA to actually build their stuff and to add it on to our product. So those are the two overview slides that we have with regards to the communications capabilities. Now, when we are getting to the collaboration, then it's all about presence, right? So when we are talking about presence, what is one of the major new things, we will come back to that in a second when Stefan starts talking, is that it is now much easier through just a simple API call to actually publish presence or to retrieve presence. So instead of having to do that all by a lot of lines of code in UCMA 2.0, it is now a lot easier to actually publish presence. And this is not only presence, by the way, for people. This is also for applications. So for example, if you have a query response bot, which is one of the applications that you can build, at this very moment that you would like to contact a query response bot, it acts as if it's almost like a person. But in real life, it's a very scalable application. But it shows in your Lync client, in the communicator, as a present application, as something that lights up green. And of course, you can do all the stuff around group management. So the management of your buddy list, the management of the different groups that you have in your buddy list, the management of how you actually set all your privacy relations to all those different groups. There's a very extensible presence schema behind the whole concept of presence in Lync Server. And through the Unified Communications Managed API, there's actually a very fine granular control that you can have that for example, I can tell a guy who is in my most favorite buddy list that I'm present, that I'm available. But to the people who are a little bit lesser in my familiarity, I can set them to to busy or to away. So you can do that all programmatically. So those are the things that I would like to call out as the set of capabilities. Now, of course, there is also, in the Unified Communications Managed API, the whole server speech platform that we ship with it. And what is important there is that if you are building an IVR, if you're building something in which you would like to recognize voice, not only speech in a spoken form, but also when you are doing a query response bot in a textual form, you can use grammar files, W3C grammar files, SRGS files, to actually recognize the text or the spoken voice. And we also support the other W3C standard of voice XML. It was almost 2.1 compliant, but we missed 2 test cases. So it's 2.x compliant, as we always call it out. And we do this actually in 26 languages. And these 26 languages, again, are exactly the same languages that Exchange supports. Now let's swap to Stefan. Let's talk about what is really, really new inside the API.
Thank you, Albert. So just to give you some context about what's new in the UCMA 3.0 API, I just want to start by giving you the roadmap of Lync Server first. So in what we called Wave 12 with OCS 2007, we primarily focused on IAM and presence. That was our main goal. Then we moved to OCS 2007 R2, and we started making a dent in the collaboration environment. In particular, we introduced a conference dial-in experience, and conferencing became a key part of our offering. Finally, when we moved to Lync Server 2010, the key investment was in voice and corporate telephony, along with the multimodal experience that some of you might know through Lync, which includes application sharing, data collaboration, chat, voice, and video. So one of the goals for our platform, because the platform is really a key differentiator in the communication space for the Lync Server offering, is that we needed to basically have a platform that basically was enterprise-grade in terms of voice telephony. So what you have in the next 3 slides are the goals that we set for our platform to basically align with the Lync Server strategy and the features associated with those goals that we implemented as part of the Unified Communication Managed API 3.0. So I'm going to start by something that I think is the most powerful goal of this release, which was essentially the audio conferencing and collaboration developer experience. So this consisted of a number of features, but I'll start by, I think, one that's going to, in which we're going to deep dive as we move along in the presentation, which is a trusted conferencing user model. So I won't say too much just right now, but I just wanted you to basically get familiar with this concept, trusted conferencing user model. Audio route management. So this is a related concept that will let you basically manipulate how the mixing takes place in our audio-video MCU. So we give you the control basically to manipulate how the audio routing takes place, you have fine-grained control over how an application can communicate with a given participant, with multiple participants, how your application can basically silently monitor people in a conference. We also enabled a one-click conferencing scheduling experience. So instead of basically creating a complex API that needed to basically multiple parameters to schedule a meeting, what we've done is we have an API that reference an admin template, and just by invoking one API, you can create a meeting that is multimodal by nature. We also introduced a number of features that give you control over what we call the conference lobby. How many of you are familiar with this concept, the lobby of a conference? Not that many. So for those of you who started using Lync Server and Lync the client, there's this concept of lobby where when you join a meeting, you might not be allowed into the meeting right away. You might be, depending on your permissions, for example, you might be a federated user, you might be an anonymous user, or you might be joining a confidential meeting where somebody who already is in the meeting will basically grant you access if he thinks that you can basically participate into that meeting. So that's what we call lobby management. Think of it a little bit, the analogy would be the lobby of a building where somebody, the receptionist or somebody else will grant you access into the building. The same concept applies here again with the lobby for a conference. We also have a number of features around global announcements, the ability for you to control what is being played back into a conference when someone joins, or if you want to create a private channel to basically do command and control using the speech technology that Albert mentioned. So you have the ability essentially to play DTMFs that are being listened to by an application that you can build, and you can essentially act on these DTMFs on behalf of any user part of this conference by building a custom application on top of Unified Communication Managed API 3.0. So another area where we invested was to make presence dead easy to use. So instead of parsing complex XML documents or presence manifest, we created a very high-level presence object model that makes it very easy for you to basically publish your presence as available, busy, but also to manipulate the call routing rules, for example. You can essentially set your forwarding rules. You can manage your delegates if you're in a boss-admin relationship, for example. You can impersonate users and basically, if you're an admin, control the call forwarding rules of the information workers in your company. So this high-level API can, oh yes, I see a question, please. Oh, absolutely. Actually, so the question, so the question was, can you control what we call the availability and the activity as part of the presence document by using the UCMA 3.0 API? Absolutely. The answer is yes. Actually, maybe Albert can not know the question.
I love this,
so
this demo, right? So we built a little utility. I'm marketing, so I don't want to mess with codes. I want to have a nice UI. So here you see, I'm actually logged in as Tosh, but this is my identity in Microsoft. And currently you can see that I've changed my string from busy to do not disturb presenting. Well, the most funny one is actually this one, because here I actually am changing myself to sleeping. You see? So you, through one API, one call in the API, you actually can set it. And you can reset the pictures. You can set yourself, for example, if someone is bugging you, and you want to have give the impression that you're just walking out, you can typically go to away idle, and then you publish it. And at this very moment, it says that I just walked out 5 minutes, but I'm still sleeping, by the way. So let me actually reset the activity string as well. This is this is not part of the SDK, but I can make it available on gotuc.net.
So we can, yes, we have that's a great question. So the question was, is it part of the SDK? The sample is currently not part because our SDK shipped. But we've been fairly successful in terms of adoption at this stage, not only within Microsoft, but also beyond Microsoft. And we started a program where we are publishing code samples on CodePlex and that are freely downloadable. And we'll give you a few references, but this application will be soon available to you as well.
Yeah. And there will actually be an article by Kurt de Ding that is actually going to explain how to exactly do that, publishing per group, per person. And that is, of course, the high end of how to manipulate presence, but it's all possible through the API, and we make it available on MSDN as well. So this sample I will upload to gotuc.net, but the other samples you will find on MSDN. Okay, let's continue. Space.
So another... Thank you, Albert. I love your enthusiasm. So contextual communications. So again, we'll give you soon a clear illustration of it. But in a nutshell, the contextual communications designate a very powerful way of basically supplying context as you initiate a communication and subsequently provide command and control tools that are correlated to a given communication. And the example would be, for example, think of the traditional communication world that it consists of the circuit switch network, for example, or PSTN. When you make a phone call, there's usually no context whatsoever except maybe your caller ID. That's the only context that you might get upon receiving a call traditionally. Now, when you approach unified communications, what changes is by using essentially this data channel to establish a similar call, you can now supply data or metadata about the current context you're in and leverage this information along with the communication information to basically give a richer experience. And we'll give you an example of that soon. But fundamentally, how this translates into is a set of APIs that from UCMA 3.0 allows you to build a server application that can drive the experience in the conversation window extension of Lync. So essentially, every time a communication goes through UCMA 3.0, and as you communicate with a Lync client, you have the ability to pop a web experience that is connected to the actual communication in Lync. And essentially, from a very high-level set of APIs in UCMA 3.0, you are able to basically take control of the experience in Lync. So that's, we'll give you an example of that soon. So moving on, just to basically double-click on the investment Lync server made, the UCMA 3.0 platform is a business voice platform. It's enterprise-grade, meaning it's very resilient. It includes a set of primitives such as the back-to-back user agents. How many of you are familiar with this concept? Okay, 1 or 2 people. So back-to-back user agents essentially consist of receiving a call and basically back-to-backing it with another call. That's fundamentally what it is. But as you basically bridge 2 calls together through these back-to-back user agents, you now take control of the communication. Because you can, for example, if Albert calls me and me is essentially a UCMA 3.0 application, I could pretend to be Albert to the remote party or somebody else, for example. But I could also say, hey, you know what, Albert, I'm help desk. And the person, although the person may be an agent, a customer service representative, may see Albert's identity. So you may create things like a one-way mirror where the person calling you thinks it's communicating with a help desk, but what really is happening in the back office is that you have the ability to pretend to be Albert, the person who actually called. So this is one mechanism to conceal the identity of a customer service representative, for example, in a routing agent from the actual customers.
Another use case, actually, of this back-to-back user agent is if you would like to provide functionality like call recording. So one of the things that very often is needed is that you actually start storing all those calls that are made for very high-value type of transactions. Now, if you would like to do a call recording, typically in a Lync communication, we try to do as much peer-to-peer. So if I talk to Stefan, it is actually a direct connection. Of course, there's some call signaling, but when there's the audio at that very moment actually starts flowing direct. Now, with this back-to-back user agent, you actually are able to actually insert yourself in that conversation and reroute audio and be able to pretend that as if you're not present, so you can do it even in a very hidden way.
Right. And another example will be third-party call control. Essentially provide you with the ability to control a communication, for example, from a web page. So again, the back-to-back user agents or third-party call control allows you to achieve that. And this is, again, we'll show you an example of that in a second. So other things that came as part of the release of Lync Server for UCMA 3.0 are functionalities such as call park and retrieve, DTMF, PIN authentication, or speech authentication. Essentially, you can basically call into UCMA 3.0 and provide a voice gateway that will authenticate a user by just calling from a regular PSTN phone or your cell phone. You have the ability basically to authenticate people calling in the API. We also made a big dent in the voice quality on UCMA 3.0 by investing in quality monitoring, quality of experience monitoring, WAN bandwidth management. So now you have the ability to basically throttle the bandwidth over your WANs. And we have APIs that allow you basically to disconnect communications that will be using up more bandwidth than you actually have in UCMA 3.0. And again, as Albert said, we are speech-enabled with 26 languages. Resiliency, 99.9% availability. So in UCMA 3.0, we invested in ways to basically resurrect calls end-to-end with Lync. So every time you establish a call, be it with a PSTN gateway or with a client, you now have the ability to be resilient to intermediate hop failure. So what does it mean? In a SIP network, you have two main entities. One is the endpoint entity, and UCMA 3.0, although a server is an endpoint. It's not a proxy, it's an endpoint. So when two endpoints communicate with one another, they communicate via a cloud of proxies along the way, of intermediate hops that each perform some routing logic and authorization logic. And that's very much what Lync server is. So now, say you need to basically bring one Lync server instance in maintenance mode. When you do that, you might have multiple communication going through these particular nodes. So we created ways to basically heal the route and establish an alternate route by using alternate servers that are present in your topology. And this is seamless to the end user, and this gives us the ability to provide a very resilient telephony network.
And this is actually something that you can see in the Lync client as well. If the network actually drops, or if there's something that's disturbing the connection, you will see the yellow bar that says, hey, connectivity is disrupted. And then a few seconds later, it will say, connectivity has been restored. And that's what is under the hood is going on, is exactly what Stefan explained just a second ago. It tries to find and repair the connection that you have.
Correct. And additionally, another piece of feedback we got from UCM 8.2.0 is we used to require to build scalable application a hardware load balancer, which is, as you all know, very expensive. So what we invested in is a way to perform software load balancing based on DNS. So it's DNS load balancing. And by doing that, by cutting the need for you to deploy a hardware load balancer, we now have a much more TCO-friendly model of deployment. Now, another great feature, and again, coming from feedback of UCM 8.2.0, is around the way the UCM 8.3.0 application gets deployed from an activation and provisioning standpoint. So we invested in two important features. One is the ability to script the activation piece. When I say activation, I mean the ability for you basically to write the configuration of your application into what we call the configuration manager server. So the way we do that is via Windows PowerShell. So it's a very script-friendly language that allows you to basically prepare your third-party application by using PowerShell. So it's instead of using like WMI script as it used to be. The second thing we've done is instead of having your application basically retrieve this information by writing code and using WMI classes, we are now basically have a first-class developer experience built in the API that basically lets you retrieve all the configuration data that you enter through the PowerShell script. So now all you do is you call one API, collaboration platform dot begin startup, and by supplying the parameters that you said, hey, you know what, I want to be auto-provision, all the informations, like the complex information, trusted GRU, listening ports, certificate, the phone number associated with each and every one of your endpoints, get provisioned automatically. So you don't have to worry or even to be cognizant of what's happening under the hood. So that's one of the key, features that was enabled in UCM 8.3.0 to make your application deployment much easier. So there's a lot of feature. But another thing, for those of you who started creating application with UCM 8.2.0, or for that matter with UCM 8.1.0, I wanted to call out the fact that your application will continue to run as is against Lync server platform. So we made sure that we didn't break any of the APIs that you might have used before, so they are still present. Although we recommend you to basically start taking advantage of the new features and the new deployment model. So it's a commitment for us not to break backwards compatibility when it comes to UCM core.
So what you see here is essentially that we have built an API to build very advanced communications applications. And the most advanced communications application that we are currently selling is the PBX, right? This Lync server that actually is supposed to be a PBX replacement. But when you are talking about, okay, hey, what are applications that are typically built by developers? It comes down to very simple things. The most simple one is actually an alert and notification application. When there is something happening that you need to be able to send out a lot of messages. We can send out through the UC managed API already from version 1.0 onwards, 30,000 messages in 1 minute. That is the amount of messages that you can hit to all the 30,000 endpoints. So if Like, for example, in financial services, Lync is really predominant, or OCS is very dominant. So at that very moment, you can blast out messages to everyone who needs to be notified, or if you've emergencies. And we'll come back to that in a second. The other thing is that the scenario that most often asked to me is, I would like not to use Lync, but I would like to use the web page to have actually consumers connect to me as a Lync server. So to enable essentially Lync from any device, any platform, through the browser is the most often asked question. And we are actually, unfortunately, there is a DNS problem at the moment, but we have actually on top of the UC Managed API, the capability of building a web service. There are several web services that have been published already in UCMA 2.0, and there's now one also that's published, a REST sample, that's published for UCMA 3.0, that actually allows you to connect. And in the SDK, there are examples on how to actually show that. And we are going to show that in the demo in a second as well.
And one thing to add is, as UCMA 3.0 is very much a .NET API, it blends very well with other assets such as Windows Communication Foundation. And if some of you are familiar with the new web API that is based on the HTTP protocol that the WCF team is working on, you can actually mash up these two technologies, UCMA 3.0 for the Unified Communication Business Logic and WCF Web API together to basically make the UC Business Logic accessible very easily on the web.
All right. So then the last two parts is essentially around customer care. There's a lot of discussion about why doesn't Microsoft ship a contact center? Why? Well, we did ship a contact center sample in the UCMA SDK. But we are in the business, as Microsoft, typically of very high volume type of products. And contact center is actually a very low volume product. So we leave this essentially to partners, but we also made it so easy to actually build a contact center or build a help desk type of functionality, and that's actually the sample that we are going to do, that is actually the future. So you saw yesterday an announcement, or the day before yesterday announcement, on how we are actually trying to mesh up, for example, Bing with social. So with other words, if you are typically looking for customer care, I spoke about that last Monday as well. What is the typical scenario? You're not calling immediately a contact center. No, you're first going to go to Bing and to Google, and you try to find what other people found. And you're going to try to contact those people. You're going to contact your friends. And those are the first line of support. If you are looking at what our vision is of how to do customer care and what to expect from Microsoft, that is the direction that you should start thinking about. We are not going to build a traditional contact center. For that, we have partners. And in doing that, right, in trying to build that customer care experience where you actually mobilize essentially the crowd, I called it crowdsourcing last Monday when I did my demo. At that very moment, you are utilizing another feature that you in Lync might know as skill search. You're trying to find the expert to actually communicate with at that very moment. So with other words, I do a search, and that's the sample that I showed on Monday. At that very moment, I get a search result, and the person who has written that search result can actually be contacted through that reach platform that I spoke about in point number 2. So these are the 4 most basic things that you can do. Alerts and notifications, do web chat, or do essentially the reach extension to mobile phones, to web pages, then to build customer care experiences, and to do expert search. Those are the basics. And of course, there is IVR in the contact center, and there's audio player, and those type of things, but they are all part of that contact center help desk. Now, we spoke about just a second ago already about doing notifications. What is important to understand is that when we started building Lync, or OCS, in its origin, we wanted to build this multi-channel. So throughout all our demos, and throughout your thinking as well, when you start building your application, start thinking, and if you click one more time, start thinking about all those people that are available on different type of devices. So someone is maybe available in a line of business application. Someone is on Outlook. Someone is using Lync. Someone is using nothing else but their ordinary phone. And for all of that, when we are essentially looking at, if you click again, at a notification that needs to be sent out, we are sending out different types of notifications to all the different endpoints. And Lync, based on the information that you have around presence, can make that decision to either call a person or to actually send an instant message, or to actually communicate directly with the line of business application. So that is what you need to think when you start thinking about alerts and notifications.
So in this particular example, what you saw was, for example, how a company can now react faster to changing conditions. So typically, if Contoso is, for example, a retail company and is monitoring its inventory to make sure that it doesn't run short during maybe like the holiday season, it can configure essentially its data warehouse with some thresholds, and as soon as the inventory hits a low threshold, can basically start sending an alert to all the stakeholders who need basically to make a decision as to what to do next. And this can be done, as Albert said, by using the most appropriate modality to basically bring the relevant stakeholders together in no time and in an automated fashion. So that's one very simple mechanism, actionable way to basically make a difference in how your company basically is reactive to change. And there are many examples of that, I'm sure, in your respective organizations. Okay, so I think Albert mentioned a lot of things about the traditional contact center. So it was a world that used to be split in silos where you had a box for IVR, another box for recording, yet another box for CTI, and something called automatic call distribution. So essentially the system was very, very fragmented, and you had to pay a high price to get any feature addition to it. So it's also a world where we talk about CTI. CTI means what? Computer telephony integration. So it's like saying there are two worlds. The one of the computer, the one of the telephony system, which are based incarnated by PBXs, and some glue that needs to basically bring these very, very different worlds together. That's where the world is at today. What we're suggesting is a very different approach where, hey, you know what? There's nothing like telephony anymore. What we have is computer-computer. Everything is converged. Chat is, you can program with UCMA in the same fashion for a chat as you would do for a voice call or a video call or an app sharing call. In addition to that, you can start using presence to basically evaluate the availability of your workforce in order to basically do an expert search escalation, for example. So by creating one process that basically unifies all the different fragments we saw in the previous slide, you can build a very streamlined application that is capable of perform data collection through IM, instant messaging, or through voice by using an IVR, or you can use contextual communication, and we'll show you an example of that in a second. And basically bring the music on hold, bring the recording, bring the human delegates and non-human delegates of a customer care solution into a very simple process that is very inexpensive for you to manage. And basically, you can start reaping the benefits of unified communications and the openness of the platform, essentially.
Before going to the actual demo now, the one thing that I would like to stress is that if you are now realizing that you have one API that you actually can use across all those modalities for all that functionality and using exactly the same classes, the very limited classes but still very powerful classes that the UCMA offers, you can build these type of help desk experiences in much less time, so much fewer time. I do not know how to say it in English, but you understand. Literally, there is a company called Extend Health, which is one of our case studies, right? A bunch of people, that's to say about 5-6 people, for half a year built a complete ACD, a complete contact center for their company. And that is revolutionary in comparison to what it used to take in the past. But let's actually go one step further, and let's actually start talking about what we are going to show.
Okay. So because it's a fairly complex demo that brings together a number of concepts that we talked about, we wanted to break it down in two parts. So one key illustration of contextual communication is the following. So here, you see the mouse here, you can see an application built based on WCF, and actually this is a sample that shipped in the SDK, by the way. So you can find the code and download it today. So this application, this web portal, is essentially using the UCMA 3.0 business logic and basically leverages WCF to create, to essentially mash up in a retail website a click-to-call, click-to-communicate functionality. And essentially, as you can see, there is a number of Windows Phone devices available on this site. And what you are able to do is essentially, by clicking on any of them, not only start a communication with an agent, but supply context, meaning the context in this particular example would be, for example, which item, which device you're interested in.
So where exactly you clicked on the page, right? That provides that context.
Correct, automatically. So now this context basically feeds the engine, the relevance engine, to basically find the best match that can actually serve you and answer your question about the particular device you selected. Obviously, this is applicable to any other items that you could have on a web page, or it could be a different application than a retail website. So that's one key example that we'll illustrate in the demo in a second. Now, the other things that we'll demo is the following thing, is the customer care platform. Essentially, if you look at a customer care platform today, the main way you have to communicate is either through a PSTN phone call and you basically type 1-800 number, or through potentially a web chat. But if you look at the price of this solution, it's usually really, really high, and the multimodal experience is not that good. So what we wanted to do is basically extend the reach of your organization to a variety of devices, starting by a web chat, web click-to-call experience that we talked about a second ago. And by the way, those are for external customer, meaning anonymous users calling into your company. 2, you can use something like Windows Live Messenger and use the network of Windows Live Messenger, for example, to make free audio-video call into your company. So instead of going through the PSTN, you can have a much more lively interaction with a customer service representative by adding your company. For example, I can drag and drop Contoso into my buddy list and basically establish a call with a help desk or a sales endpoint for anything. So we'll show you an example of that in a second. And then finally, you can also use simply Lync if you want to basically serve your internal information workers for help desk and use all the modalities such as application sharing, audio, video, or chat to basically provide IT support to your employees. You can do it as well by using the same platform. So essentially, extend the reach of your organization to basically better serve your customers. So in the demo, we'll show you there are several stages. The first stage will be to make essentially to initiate a call with a UCMA 3.0 application, which in this case is a contact center. As you can see, there are 2 offices. The front office, which is essentially the experience provided to the caller, to the external customer, and the back office, which is the experience that you have for the agent, the customer service representative, the expert, or the supervisor. So those are the 3 personas you traditionally have in any contact center solution. So the first step when you make the call would be to perform what we call data collection, the ability of basically understanding in an automated fashion what the customer wants, why it's calling, for which purposes, and basically identify a match for this particular contact. So every time you get a call, the first step is to put the customer on hold and basically, based on the agent's skills and availability, determine who can serve the customer best and in a timely fashion. So we'll show you that the UCMA 3.0 provides a way to basically play back music. And as soon as an agent with matching skills becomes available, the UCMA 3.0 application, which is camping on the presence of a set of agents, will be able to basically dispatch the call to offer the call to that particular agent. And then if the agent accepts, the connection will be made through this UCM S3O application. In that case, we'll demonstrate how we can basically perform anonymization of identity, how we can basically conceal the identity of the agent so that the customer cannot bypass this routing engine and connect directly to the agent for a sub-second call, for example. And then we'll show you how basically the trusted conferencing user model, which we're going to deep dive into, provides the ability basically to provide features such as silent monitoring. Essentially, when the supervisors want to chime in into a customer interaction, he wants to be able to, or she wants to be able to silently ensure of the quality of the customer interaction between a customer service representative and a customer. And at some point, this person may also want to whisper coaching instructions in order to say, hey, you know what? Could you put the customer on hold? I'd like to basically give you some feedback on how to better serve this customer now. But and lastly, the supervisor can also intervene, barge in into the communication, and take over to basically address a matter in the state of the agent. Okay, so let's do, I think we can do the demo with that said.
Yep. All right, it's open already. Okay, so this is the actual thing. So this is the web portal, and so as you can see, you have a number of HTML widgets, click to chat with an expert. And essentially, let's say I'm interested in this particular device. All I have to do is basically click on it, and as you can see, I was logged in. And by the way, it's an anonymous, it's an ASP.NET authentication. It's not a corporate authentication here. But Contoso Brands is a website I'm going to often, and as a result, I can basically give them my personal information. So I verified that my phone number is correct. Yes, it did. And as you can see, the system has already understood what I was calling for. In basically thanks me for my interest in HTC cell phones. Now I see that I'm connected to an agent. And at this stage, I expect to see, let me make sure that you have, so I see someone is typing. And at this stage, I say, hey, got UC agent, hello, I see you have a question on HD7. So the agent already knows what I'm calling for. I didn't have to supply more data than just a mere click to call at this stage. Let me actually show that, because this is on the agent side. This is a little bit off script, so excuse me. But because of the person clicking on exactly on that link in that part of the page, right, we passed on the information about this is the phone that the person is interested in. So there's no more questioning the customer about what are you calling for. No, I really could see the phone that the person is interested in. So let's go back to the demo. But that's the context that we passed on by clicking that particular link.
Okay, so now in addition to that, maybe I need, let's assume that I need to run at this stage, and because maybe my,
maybe you have a question that cannot be solved over IM, right?
Right, or yes, or maybe, I don't want to type away so much information. I may elect essentially to click on this button right here, and see I have a regular cell phone, and normally at some point you should hear it ring. Oh, it's coming pretty fast, in fact. And at this very moment, on the agent side, I'm actually also establishing hello.
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 And again, on my side, on the agent side, just let us show here, I'm actually talking via Lync, right? So let me actually mute my microphone. Oh, it was not that muted, but anyhow. So you can see I'm using Lync on the front end. And this can be the Lync client as it is, or you can actually use the Lync in a suppressed mode in an agent desktop that you're using. But the fact alone that you can establish a callback literally in seconds and then be able to hook in both the customer on their cell phone as well as the IM channel, because the IM channel still works as well, right? So if you go back to your site, I can still IM. I'm still here. This is a multi-channel. We are all hooked into what was called earlier in the slides the Trusted User Conference. We have one conference call that we created, conference call is the wrong word, but one trusted conference in which we actually now chose to hook in the modalities of the IM as well as the modality of the voice call. So let's actually...
And fundamentally, what happened when a call me is I used this back-to-back user agent capability, which created this callback. So essentially, I was able to drive the communication, the voice communication from this web page and receive a call on my cell phone directly. So that's one way, essentially, to basically show you an example of multimodal communication over the web. Now, another, I think, important element of what you can do with the UCMA 3.0 API is, for example, if I now go...
You minimized it and you did not close it, actually.
Yeah, so I just want to show you. So another way to basically leverage the power of the Unified Communication API is by showing you these HTML controls here embedded in the web page. So for example, here I have two entry points with daily beans representing the availability and the average queue time associated with two separate services, one for help desk and one for sales. So the activity, instead of being sleeping or idle, away, or available, can simply be the wait time that I'm expecting to have upon calling this system at this time. So if I don't want to wait, I may come at a later stage, or I may register for a callback. So those are new ways to basically leverage presence in a very scalable fashion and providing a much more lively experience for your organization to your customers.
And behind this concept of help desk or sales are agents, right? And in this model that we have around presence, we essentially are aggregating the presence of all those agents. In this case, there's only one, me. And that's because this agent is busy. This whole queue of agents is busy, in this case, only me. At that very moment, the queue also, as of the help desk, is busy. And in a second, it should actually go to available because the agent becomes available as well. But it's an aggregated presence. And what is very important to realize there as well is that usually when you ask for presence, you do that on a one-on-one basis, right? So you reach out and you say, oh, is that person there? No. What we have done here, and actually what you can find in the sample code that we shipped in the SDK, is a way of how to abstract that aggregated presence. So essentially what we do is in the application that we have created, this web chat application, we are caching the presence of all the agents. So instead of having to hit the server time after time for every individual, is this person now available, is this person available? We essentially built an application, and in this application, it actually has the state of all the people, and then your web application queries that application. So that's another concept that is a very powerful concept behind here. And so, now we have a dark screen.
Yeah, so I'm going to show you another example using Windows Live Messenger. Once my machine reboots, and for some reason it froze.
That's a not good thing, but we don't have Windows Live Messenger.
So let me...
All right, so let me actually log in here on Windows Live Messenger on my machine. What do you think about that one?
Yes.
Here's Windows Live Messenger. And it, of course, logs in immediately as me, so I have to sign out. Sign out from everywhere. And the person is called Kelly Kraut, right?
Yes.
Sorry for this. This is a small demo. And the password must be the same as always, I hope. No.
So let me... So I think we should just wait. It's going to take a second. Don't worry.
Okay. But what is? Can you type in your password?
No, you can stay here. Here we go. It's pretty fast.
So we are not. Say again.
Yes.
Yeah. So the question is, do we have a queue for the agents? Yes. So in this application that we have written in the UC Managed API, we have essentially defined what are queues or skill sets. And associated with that queue or skill set, we have essentially a database where we essentially are allowing agents to report themselves available for that particular skill. So in the sample that I showed last Monday, for example, this was purely based on a web crawl. But in this particular application, in a real contact center, you actually do that on the basis of agents really logging into their workstation and at that very moment being available. So there is a queue mechanism that is provided. So the question is then, okay, hey, if you are doing this assignment in this automatic call distributor, do you do that on the who's first come, first serve? Well, there are, yes, in essence, we are doing that, so first come, first serve. But there's a little bit more of intelligence in the algorithm that we built for this particular application. What we namely have done is we make it presence aware. So instead of just saying, okay, first come, first serve, we take actually a look at what is the Lync present state that you have before assigning a case. And we will show that in a second as well when we are setting myself as an agent to busy in order to make sure that that person can not be disturbed at that very moment. Now, we as Microsoft are not in the business of defining queue mechanisms and what algorithm of best assigning people. That is what companies like Aspect, Avaya, and so on do, right? So, and also what typical companies like Extend Health, they are in the insurance business, have insurance agents. They've got very elaborate algorithms on determining which agent is allowed to answer which insurance call that is coming in. So that is an algorithm that you can just write in .NET and hook into that mechanism that we provide in the SDK. So it's a matchmaking software in that sense.
So now that Windows Live Messenger is back, I'm going to show you how you can essentially add your customer care entry point on the public instant messaging cloud in, for example, something like Windows Live Messenger. So obviously,
just to give you a little bit of background behind this as well, right? So what many people do not realize is how many people actually are using Live Messenger. But what many people do not realize either is that in our customer care experience in Microsoft, we provide a 1-800 number. Do you know how much we are paying for that 1-800 number per year? Just pure telephony costs? Tens of millions of dollars. So actually by giving people an opportunity to dial in via, for example, Live Messenger, to dial in via Connect, to dial in via Lync, especially if you have business customers, is going to save us a lot of money. And that's why we are investing in this, that you actually are able not only to connect to Lync, but also are able to connect through other mechanisms like I spoke about Connect and Live Messenger that we showed. Imagine Skype there in the back of your, we're not supposed to talk about it, but all those people that just can dial in into your contact center using those alternative channels.
So what I'm going to do is I'm going to remove the contact center from the favorites, and actually I'm going to also remove it from my contact list to show you that there's no smokes and mirror here. I'm going to delete the contact. And essentially, all you need to do is, add a friend, and this help desk at gotuc.net is essentially the cloud that hosts the contact center application based on UCMA 3.0, can be simply added to your contact list, so I could make it a favorite too. And normally, the application was going to accept this invitation and so it's been added. I should have an acknowledgement soon. Normally. So, did I mistype it? Or is it sales?
Sales, try sales.
Oh, it's maybe sales. Okay, I mean, it's sales at gotuc.net. Ah, there we go. We're in business. Contact center. So now, essentially, the way to establish a communication, for example, is by just making a video call, in the normal way you would engage with any of your contacts. And can you hear me? Maybe the sound? Paul?
Welcome to GotUC Sales. What type
So let me call again, because I think you missed the first part.
So you are connected now to an IVR, and that's the prompts that you would be hearing. Because in this case, we are not transmitting the context from the website, right? So this is a pure phone call.
Paul?
Welcome to Got UC Sales. What type of product do you need help with? I'm sorry, I did not understand that.
Cell phones.
What type of product do you need help with? Cell phones, laptops, or desktops?
Cell phones.
Sorry, I could not hear you. What type
One.
of product do you need help with? Cell phones, laptops, or desktops?
Cell phones.
What brand of phones can we assist you with? HTC, LG, or Samsung?
HTC.
Please hold while we connect you.
So that's the music. And again, this is a free call with video.
And I now need to mute my microphone and his microphone.
And then I would see essentially the interaction directly over the cloud, an audio-video call, free audio-video call. So it's even better than the 1-800 number. You know, you can basically add a buddy, drag and drop it. You know, at some point it'll be Skype. Right now it's Windows Live Messenger. But essentially, one way to show how you can extend the reach of your company and use all these modalities and essentially change how you do business, change how you reach out to your organization by using multiple modalities. So, so now having said that, what we're going to do is focus more on what's happening in the back office so that you have a better perspective. So we should give you two examples of a PSTN call, web chat, Windows Live Messenger with audio video from a customer experience perspective. Now we're going to move to the back office and see what's happening happening there. So we're going to hang up. I'm going to call back again, and this time we're going to go to the agent experience, and the agent's going to be set to busy. And I'm going to call again from Windows Live Messenger so that you see what's happening there. And I'm going to be careful with the mic so that.
Welcome to Got UC Sales. What type of product do you need help with? Cell phones, laptops, or desktops? What brand of phones can we assist you with? HTC, LG, or Samsung? Please hold while we connect you.
So now I'm on a hold, and the agent is currently serving a customer. So as you can see, he's busy. And as he's wrapping up a call, he's going to set his status to online to serve a new customer, which is me in this particular case. As soon as he does that, the toast pops, the call is offered, and he's going to quickly accept the call. And here, let's pause for a second, but the agent can basically get customer data, so we're going to mute everything. Exactly, it's much better now. But this is essentially the information that the agent is getting. He gets, for example, CRM data. If anyone is present, he sees that Kelly Kraut is currently calling. And as you can see, it's a conferencing experience that is happening in the back office, whereas the customer had more of a peer-to-peer conversation with the help desk. So in this experience, what you can see is that there's a conversation window extension pane here that Albert is showing. And this whole experience here is driven by the UCMA 3.0 application. That's, again, part of the contextual communication aspect. We can basically drive this button for putting the call on hold, and as soon as I do that, normally, you see, it toggles the music back and forth so that the agent can basically control what's happening with the customer and put him on hold or put the customer on hold if he needs to basically get additional data, talk to an expert, talk to a supervisor on a sidebar. Another option is, for example, to escalate to an expert by selecting skills. Again, those skills are tied to the database of the UCMA 3.0 application.
So in this case, when you spoke about the different queues that we were asking about, this is an XML file that we read. So you can see here is a queue for cell phones. There's a queue for all the different brands. And because we get a lot of questions in our demo about HD7, we also have created a special queue for HD7. And agents can actually subscribe to multiple queues at the same time. So this is an application that you write, but the application effectively is controlling all the time what is going on in that trusted user conference.
Yes.
So that is what is the most important thing that we would like to get across. So instead of having a contact center where you had all those different parts and pieces, we effectively now have one trusted user conference, and depending on what at that point in time the application needs, you conference into that conference. That's why we called it a conference. You conference in at that point in time that particular functionality that you need. So in the beginning, you had the functionality of the IVR. When you have the music on hold, you have the music on hold player. And you actually, at that very moment, just at time, you swap in and swap out resources in that trusted user conference. And in the sample that we have in the SDK, you can see how we do it, but it's with very few lines of code that you actually can achieve that.
And another persona that I think is relevant in a contact center is the persona of the supervisor that you can see here. And this person can simply say, go and, again, communicate with the UCMA3.0 applications, which gives her who in the agent she monitors is currently working or active in a call. In this case, we can see that Tosh, who Albert incarnates, is currently active. At that point, she can basically start a silent monitoring session to see what's going on. And she's going to receive a call, and she'll now be able to essentially hear the conversation between the customer and the agent.
So in your application logic, at that very moment, what you did is you actually hooked in the audio path, but just only for listening, not for speaking, for the supervisor. And you have that fine control, right? In and out of audio, in and out of IM, in and out of everything, you can control through your application.
Yes, and again, the same. That's part again of this contextual communication experience driven by UCMA 3.0. Now, if I go quickly on the agent experience, so it's D here.
Yeah, D.
You can see that in the roster, the Lync, who is the supervisor, does not show up. So the agent doesn't even know that he is being monitored. And the same is true, obviously, of the Windows Live Messenger client as well.
And that relates back to what we told earlier about what we call this back-to-back user agent. The back-to-back user agent, because it is an application that puts itself in the middle of this communication, is able to filter out the data that someone is actually, in this case a supervisor who is authorized, is able to actually listen in. So that's why you don't see that person in the roster of the actual conference call that is going on.
So the last function that I'll demonstrate here is the ability for you to whisper coaching instruction to an agent. Basically, without being heard by the customer, Lync can basically whisper, and at that time you can see her join the actual conversation. So if I now switch to the agent dashboard on D, you can see that Lync, the supervisor, has now shown up. So now the agent can see that who is the supervisor who was monitoring him or her, and basically can see that some communication is to be expected from that supervisor at that stage. Anyways, so with that said, we're going to deep dive now into the few concepts as I promised by going back to the presentation.
There's one more thing that I wanted to call out. You can see actually in the Lync client very clearly what are the modalities that are active, right? So at this very moment, I have the modalities for Lena that are active in the IM and voice. For the other ones are IM, voice, and video. And you actually, in case of Windows Live Message, you do not have app sharing, but in case you would have a Lync call for your own internal help desk, at that very moment you would also be able to do app sharing. And this is someone trying to IM Stefan. So let's actually go back now to the concepts behind here.
Correct. So now that you have seen this illustration, I'm going to show you the magic that is happening under the hood. So this is this concept of basically driving music on hold, driving the silent monitoring experience, driving the whispering and barging in experience is possible because of the audio, what we call the audio route management. So what you see on this slide is this table. This table, we call it familiarly the who's talk to whom table. The rows correspond to the sources, the media sources. In this case, you have a customer, an agent, an expert. The columns represent the sinks, the people who are hearing what you're saying. So essentially, a source communicates with a sink, and this matrix represents the wiring. Essentially, can this source be heard by this sink? Okay, it's like an ear and a mouth, essentially. The mouth being the source, obviously, and the ear being the sink. So when you join a conference, usually everyone can hear one another. So that's what we call the default mix. When customer, agent, and expert in this particular case can hear one another, this is the matrix you have. Agent can talk to customer, agent can talk to expert can talk to both customer and customer can talk to agent and expert. Okay, that's the baseline. Now, when you put the customer on hold, you remember when I was toggling the hold button, this is what's happening under the hood. You have a trusted conferencing user that is invisible in the roster. That's because UCMA 3.0 gives you the power to have the highest level of privileges into the conference. Sorry. And so, anyways, the red arrow that you see is essentially what we call it's an API called the outgoing audio route. It's essentially you pick one participant, in this case a customer, and you wire a WMA file that's going to play back the music you heard before. And this is done by just invoking one API that says, hey, update the audio, outgoing audio routes so that you can basically play back this file. And now if we pay attention to the who's talk to whom table right here, what you see is there's a new source called the music on a hold source, and it only communicates with the customer. Okay? So that's it. We essentially punched a wired between the music on hold source and the customer.
Effectively, what you see here is what you see in those old movies when there's those ladies at the switchboards, right? But in the past, that switchboard only has in and output on the same wire. We are able to actually separate not only the different modalities, but we are also able to separate the in and out.
So the other thing that you need to notice is once you do that, the customer is put in a black hole. As he's no longer, see this dotted blue line is gone, and the customer cannot hear what's happening. So essentially, both the agent and the expert can have a sidebar without basically worrying that the customer hear what they're saying. Silent monitor. So this is a function of the supervisor. Now, this is again the same concept, but this time instead of multiple outgoing audio routes, what you have is you're syncing data, and this supervisor entity is now basically syncing in 3 incoming audio routes. One from the customer, one from the agent, one from the expert. The back-to-back user agent is used, as Albert mentioned, to basically provide this invisibility to the supervisor. If we move to Whisper, now that you understand the concepts, the Whisper is essentially continue to hear what's happening in the conference, but in addition, create a private audio channel with the agent. So the agent can essentially hear the supervisor, but the customer or the expert wouldn't be hearing the coaching instructions sent by the supervisor. Again, if you go back to the who's talk to whom table, you can see that clearly because the outgoing audio route basically is only established with the agent. So supervisor talking to agent. And then finally, if the supervisor elects to intervene in a conversation, all he has to do is basically create 2 more outgoing audio routes with the other participants. And we go back essentially to the same configuration as the default mix. So essentially, these privileges that you have to manipulate audio outgoing routes in a very effective fashion, it's very easy to use the API to achieve that, is one of the key strengths of our API today. And And we've seen a lot of our partners basically take advantage of those things to create various scenarios, not just customer care, by the way, but also a number of interesting collaboration scenarios.
All right, we are running out of time now. So
yes, so yes, as we are running out of time, I wanted to show you briefly one more thing. I'm sure you'll be interested. Is we mentioned that the ability for you basically to blend WCF and UCMA 3.0 together, and we have essentially a demo that basically shows just that. So what you see here is a very simply, a web-friendly way of displaying UC. It's like essentially this is Ganesh is one of our developers, and he built this WCF sample that basically allow you to basically browse its body list. For example, if I say contacts, I'm able to basically display the contacts in one shot like this in XML. And if I navigate to this link, for example, I could get the picture of one of his contacts.
And this is actually an abstraction in a web service of exactly that UC managed API, right? So it's just a different representation, again, of all that information that is available in the UC managed API. So if you would like to actually build web applications, it's very easy to build the WCF service on top of it that essentially shows this.
And you can it's a very friendly way of accessing data. And you see, I can browse through multiple pictures, mine and Albert's. I can also, for example, display my contact card in one shot. And look how friendly this is. It's just, you can display this in a browser. And this is by accessing UCMA 3.0 through WCF, essentially. So you can see my personal information as follows. What you can also do, and just to show you it works across browsers, is you can, by leveraging the new WCF web API, is you can show the same information. For example, I could display again the contacts, but this time I could choose not XML, but by simply choosing the format as JSON, I could display normally the same thing, in a JSON format if it sticks.
Right arrow? Yeah. No, doesn't.
So maybe this one is not working. But anyways, this is an interesting, here we go. So you have the body list, but in a different format that is much more friendly for JavaScript developers, for example. So essentially, all these samples are mini illustration of how you can use this server API, UCMA 3.0, to build web, mobile, Slate applications, or basically server-side IVRs, contextual communications for basically your customer care scenarios and alerts and notification systems. So I hope it gave you a fairly broad overview of what you could do with the UCMA 3.0 API. And if you have any questions, feel free to ask them.
So we officially need to wrap up the session here, but we will be around to answer questions. Fill out the evaluation form, please do. And thank you for your attendance here and coming so early. If you have questions, we will be around